This is our truly great local hero, and transforming the world more than any other local, with the possible exception of John Batiste.
I'm a fan of it.
And it started here. I'm going to do a little bit of, I'm a history biography dude. It started because Hurricane Katrina and your niece Nadia and a school, I can't remember, I think it was called the Newman School.
I think you're a little
And they were running out of math teachers after Katrina, and this is how the saga of you escaping Wall Street begins.
A bit. The Katrina, well, it started a little bit before that, but you're right, and I actually forgot about the whole, once Nadia and her brothers had to move, that was actually part of it as well. But yeah, it was 2004. I was a year out of business school. I just got married. My family from New Orleans, I was born and raised here. They were coming out and visiting Grace King High School, and we have a few.
Betsy Fisher.
Which does not exist anymore, but the building is, it just came out of conversation. My 12-year-old cousin Nadia was having trouble with unit conversion at the time. I offered to tutor her remotely, and that worked out. She was able to place into a faster track at Newman. Word spreads in my family, free tutoring is going on. Before I know it, and with 10, 15 cousins, family, friends that I'm tutoring on a regular basis. And you're right, when Katrina happened the next year, that became even more of an accelerant because there was like a month where they weren't in school, and then they were shifting from this school to that school, or they were in Florida, et cetera. But by 2005, I started writing software for them, and I called it Khan Academy. And in the back of my mind, I said, well, maybe it could be useful for people beyond my cousins. And then in 2006, a friend of ours said, hey, why don't you make some videos to supplement them? And I initially thought that was a little silly to use YouTube to, but I made that content, and my cousin's family famously told me they liked me better on YouTube than in person. And I kept going. And what they were saying is it was useful to have me on demand, pause, repeat. They didn't have to feel embarrassed if they had to review something from before. And then it was 2008, 2009. At this point, I had set it up as a nonprofit, mission-free world-class education for anyone, anywhere. But at the time, my day job, I was working at a hedge fund. I didn't think this was what I was going to do for my living in 2008. But by 2009, it had kind of taken over things. And that's when I quit the day job to work on it full-time.
Yeah, and the mission was admission-free, education for everyone. You do it in a very simple way. It's almost just your hand on a chalkboard conversationally. So it's not super produced. What made you think of doing it in that way?
Yeah, I mean, there wasn't really a lot of thought put into it. It was, and this is, and I'm sure we're going to talk about AI, and I think this is relevant to the whole AI conversation, because it's never about the technology. It really was from those early days, I was able to tutor Nadia, and that worked out. And then I started tutoring more and more folks. And then it just became a question of, how do you scale this? And those first software tools that I was writing for them, I saw that they needed more practice on certain skills. It was becoming really a bit of a pain for me every night to go look on the internet for some practice problems for them. And so I said, well, I can scale if it generates problems for them. And then 2006, I was like, well, I just explained least common multiple last week, and now I have another cousin asking me the exact same question a week later. A video could be useful here. So if you think about it, the entire process has always been, what's the minimum to do to scale? Now, I think it was a blessing in 2006 when I made those first videos that I didn't think it was some big enterprise. I said, these are my
I did a couple with you.
We've done together.
On, just in your little office with a little camera. And we were doing the American Revolution, and we almost did it on the fly, but it just kept growing into all sorts of different fields.
And I think that on-the-fly aspect of it is important. There's so much, when you look at any education, or not just education materials out there, it'll be done by a big company. You'll get a bunch of smart people, but they'll get into a committee, they'll write a script, then they'll hire someone with a good voice who doesn't really understand what they're reading to read the script. And then as a consumer, when you get that, it feels polished, but you don't really feel connected with what's happening there, versus if someone just presses record, they're willing to think out loud, They're willing to maybe take a few, zigs and zags while they're explaining something, but you can tell it's happening in real time. I think we're very attuned to that. And it was for my cousins, and so people could tell. Like in some of those, they're still up there. You could search by date uploaded, and I'm like, all right, Nadia, what should we cover today? And I'm making it up completely on the fly, and I use her name in it, or I'm using one of their other names in the video.
Let's leap ahead to AI, as you suggested, because that's what we're going to talk about really today is Conmigo, which is an AI tutor for everybody. But on this stage, exactly a year ago, in these chairs, Bill Gates said, it's going to change everything, AI. In fact, you announced to the students in the room, he said, you have to focus on how to connect AI to whatever creativity you're doing, like Blake, who you just met, is doing with people. And I said, well, when did you realize that AI, especially OpenAI's ChatGPT, was going to work? He said, I was skeptical, and when they showed it to me, I sent it back, and I said, don't bring it to me until it can pass the AP biology exam. And this is where you re-enter the tale.
Yeah, and I found out that after the fact. Right. It was in summer of 2022. Just get a random email from Sam Altman and Greg Brockman at OpenAI, and they said, hey, we're working on our next generation model. It's going to finish training in a couple of weeks. We think this is going to be the model that really wakes people up to the potential of generative AI. It's going to be exciting, but it also is going to be a little bit unnerving potentially. And so they wanted to, well, based on your story, they had two motives, but the motive that they told me was we want to launch with socially positive use cases with organizations that people trust that have the technical capability to take advantage of it. And by their own accounts, they said Khan Academy was the first group we thought of. They hadn't thought of anyone else yet. And I, just as like a nerd in Silicon Valley, I paid attention to generative AI at that point, what GPT-2, GPT-3 could do. And it's cool, it was cool, but when you really looked at it, it was gibberish. It didn't really make it looked like writing, but it wasn't really thoughtful writing. So we're like, yeah, I'm happy to take a look. And so we were on a video conference. It was myself, our chief learning officer, and Sam and Greg, and they had a little chat interface. And you got to remember, people are used to what I'm about to describe, but this was about 4 months before ChatGPT came out. And it was with eventually GPT-4, which is a much more advanced model than GPT 3.5, which is what ChatGPT is built on. But it was not a coincidence that the first question that Sam and Greg showed me was an AP Bio question. And they said, Sal, so what's the answer? So I'm reading it. I'm like, okay, I'm pretty sure it's C. It's about osmosis. And then they asked the bot, and it said C. I'm like, all right, ask it to explain why. It explained it. I said, ask why the other choices aren't correct. It explained it. I was like, that's when I started to get, kind of goosebumps. Then I said, well, ask it to write another question like this. It did it. Ask it to write 10 more. It did it. And at that point, I was just like, okay, I don't know. Is this like am I being punked? Is this a science fiction? Like, what is going on here? And they said, would you like access? I was like, absolutely. And then that weekend, myself, our chief learning officer, and our CTO, as far as we could tell, and we have some friends who've come in. Most of the people who know me say I have trouble sometimes keeping secrets, and this was like the biggest secret, like that I had ever had access to, and but that weekend I almost couldn't sleep because we were just trying out different things that frankly the world had never seen before. And this is the first time, and once again, it is easy to get enamored with the technology, but it should never be technology for technology's sake. It was more of like, when we were able to prompt it to say, hey, take on the persona of a thoughtful tutor who's empathetic. And I was even, I was doing wild stuff. I was like, you are the Robin Williams character in Dead Poet Society. Inspire me. And it did it. And I'm like, well, this changes everything. And so we, got most of our organization under an NDA, and we were, this dream. Everything we talked about from Nadia until summer of 2022 was how do you scale up that one-on-one tutoring? And now we have this thing that had issues. It was hallucinating, it was making up stuff, it had math errors, but in certain ways it was really able to emulate some of that empathy, some of that motivation, and some of that conceptual interaction that I was able to do at Nadia, or you think any teacher would be able to.
So it'd be a one-on-one tutor for every kid on the planet, potentially.
that's always kind of been our goal, right? When you say free world-class education for anyone, anywhere, the free and the anyone, anywhere implies accessibility. But when you say world-class, you kind of do imagine as low of a student-teacher ratio as you can get. You can kind of imagine, hey, if you're having trouble with something, slow down, speed up. We've always known what the gold standard in education is. If you go back
to Socrates,
if you go back to Socrates, who's Plato's tutor, who's Aristotle's tutor, who is Alexander the Great's tutor.
He had better students than most of us, yeah.
I've met some nice students that you've had. No, but I mean, so you can imagine if you were a future emperor, you got a great education. You had Aristotle slowing down, speeding up for you. 200-300 years ago, we had to make a compromise. It's a very utopian idea. We shouldn't take it for granted. A lot of great things have happened from free mass public education. But the only way we could do it 200-300 years ago was the beginning of the industrial age. We said, well, let's use the same tools. Let's batch students together, move them at a set speed. If one student gets a C, too bad. The line keeps moving. We're going to have these things called standards. And it was okay for an industrial society. If not every student mastered their algebra, that's okay. They needed, laborers in this part. And those who did master all their concepts, they could go into the, what we would now call the knowledge economy.
You mentioned a moment ago how you were able to first get it to be conversational, tell stories, work on stories. That's in the book. It opens the book and even play different characters. I want you to help me because I was on this stage Thursday night talking about the 100 greatest novels with Jeff Goldberg and The Atlantic, and I was ragging on how bad I think The Great Gatsby actually is. But in your book, I think it's either your daughter or one of your students starts talking to Gatsby himself and understands the book better, right?
Yeah, it's wild. I remember the first time we experimented with this. It was, and I write about this in my book. This was December of 2022. And my daughter, Dia, at the time was 11, and I was like, hey, I got this thing, and it can write a story with you. And so she starts writing a story with the AI, and she's writing they write a story about a social media influencer who's stuck on a desert island without internet access. And so she's like, and at some point, the character is like having like a lot of anxiety because he can't share how beautiful the scene is of this desert island. And my daughter's like, I really want to help, and the character's name was Samantha, I really want to help her, like I really want to counsel her. And I was like, well, you should try. And so she says, I'd like to talk to Samantha. So this character that my daughter is constructing with an AI, all of a sudden it says, hey Dia, it's me, Samantha. I really can't figure, I'm really feeling anxious right now. And my daughter is kind of doing cognitive behavioral therapy with this character that she's co-writing in a book with an AI. And I'm like, this is science fiction. Like, what is happening here? Yeah. But that was the first time that I was just like, yeah, every hour we think about what's possible, we realize we're being too narrow in what's possible now with this technology. So that was the first time, like, oh yeah, we should have some type of functionality where you could talk to simulations of at least literary characters, et cetera. And so we have this other project with Arizona State University called Con World School. It's a virtual high school, actually middle and high school. And one of the students, her name's Sanvi, she's based in India. Mm-hmm. And she's reading The Great Gatsby. And it's a perhaps overstudied book, but why does he look at the green light
at the end of the dock.
Daisy at the end of the dock, and people have written about this, but Sanvi, just on a whim, because she had access to Conmigo, says, hey, I'd like to talk to Jay Gatsby. And so she has a whole conversation with him about and we have a whole simulations of literary characters about the dock. And the way it's designed, it's not just a call and response that some people are familiar with on ChatGPT. It's designed to actually drive the conversation. So it's like, AI Jay Gatsby is like, oh, Sanvi, there's a lot in my life that I haven't been able to achieve, and Daisy Buchanan, there's this love for her, and I always stare at it, and then AI Jay Gatsby will say, well, Sanvi, do you ever have feelings like are there things that are in your life? And they apparently had like a 5-hour conversation, and then she apologizes for taking up his time, and he's like, well, I am an AI, so it's okay, but it's good to be polite to these things, yeah.
This is just a wonderful setup, and I'm sure people are now eager to say, okay, show me. Show me what y'all are talking about. You got some ways you can show it?
I could show just so, oh yeah, there we go. So what you're seeing is a screen, that's just a Khan Academy exercise that if y'all were to go right now, you could start using. What's new is the little chat bot there at the bottom right. And a couple of things here. That's a guardrail. Conversation is recorded and viewable by your teacher. If the student says, tell me the answer, it will not tell them the answer. It is an ethical tutor. But then you can see the student's actually making a mistake here. They're distributing that -2 incorrectly. I know many of y'all caught that. And then what you see is, it says, I see that you tried to simplify the equation, but I'm curious how you got to your step. Can you explain your thought process? Remember, we need to distribute the -2 to both the 9 and the 2m inside the parentheses. Let's try that step again. So I think you're already seeing that even though it's using the same, it's using right now, and we're looking at a bunch of different models from a bunch of different people, but it's using GPT-4. And even if you were to go to ChatGPT and you were to pay the extra money to have access to GPT-4, you'll get a very different interaction than what you're getting here. This is much more conversational, much more like a tutor. And then there's a lot of work going on to make the math work a lot better than you might expect. And we could talk about it, but as you can see, this is meant for classroom use. The teacher not only can see the transcript, if the student gets into a conversation with it that looks inappropriate, it'll actively notify the parents and the teachers. It can give them a synopsis of what they've been up to. This over here, this is just another example of the AI encoding. The student's trying to get the clouds to part, and the student can't figure out why the right cloud isn't moving. And those of y'all who code will probably appreciate that there's something pretty magical here, where the student is interacting with the AI. They're not saying, why didn't this for statement work? They're saying, why did the right cloud not move? That cloud is drawn with a bunch of ellipses. For the AI, I'm kind of blown away that it understands what part of the code is actually drawing the clouds. And which one is the right cloud is kind of mind-blowing. But yes, it's just as we saw before, it's acting as an on-demand tutor for students. And I've said, I have a computer science background, and it is a better tutor. When I've seen my own kids use it, it is far more patient than I am debugging, 12-year-olds code. This right over here is another example, and this is a student watching a video on Khan Academy. It has context of that video, and this is the age-old question, why do I need to learn this? And then the AI asks the right question, what do you care about? I can help explain how learning about different sizes and sciences can connect to your interests. Student says, I want to be a professional athlete. And says, awesome, as a professional athlete, understanding the science of sizes can help you appreciate how your body works at a cellular level. For example, knowing how cells, proteins, and molecules interact can make better choices about nutrition, hydration, and recovery. Plus, it's always good to have a well-rounded knowledge. And one thing that we've added, it now remembers that. So in the future, if you want example problems, it'll make it around athletics. But we've made it so that it's transparent, so the students can reset it. They can see all the, what we call insights that the AI has captured about the student. And they could say, no, delete them, reset them. And it's also useful, I'll show in a second about the teacher use case. Obviously, it's a pain for a teacher to always say, I'm a 9th grade teacher teaching biology, et cetera, et cetera. It starts to remember what works for them.
Well, wait, let's drill down into that, because could it be a lifelong tutor where you start in kindergarten and throughout your career, maybe for the next, not just school, but next 70 years, it remembers, hey, you got a problem distributing the -2, or and knows what you know and how to get you further?
That's the aspiration. I mean, it really is the aspiration to have something that can be with you from when you're learning your ABCs and 1, 2, 3s, all the way to when you're a grad student, or maybe you're even, you're now a professional, and you literally have that tutor that
Who has that data? I mean, I might be worried.
Yeah, no, you should be worried. There's different places where that data could sit. There's the data that is being trained, that's being used to train the underlying model. We are very careful with that, so none of what we're seeing right over here is being shared with OpenAI or Google or Microsoft or any of the other parties that we might work with for future training. And it's not that they're doing irresponsible things with it, but there is some, for the most part, they've also put guardrails, but you don't want, say, personally identifiable information to get in there, and all of a sudden, the broader model knows something about Walter Isaacson that, well, you're a celebrity, but, that, about some kid that it shouldn't know. So we want those guardrails in place. We actually don't even we try to de-identify any personally identifiable information.
But what if I wanted to identify, what if I wanted to apply to Tulane and say, here's what I know, can I submit this?
So on the Khan Academy side, like these insights that I'm talking about is like, oh, young Walter wants to be a historian and he's into pizza and, I don't know if you are, but those types of things are stored on the Khan Academy side. And yes, over time, and it's not just for making things more personalized, it's also so that 2 weeks later, when you're trying to learn entropy in computer science, the AI says, yeah, this is really similar to what we talked about in chemistry class, even though it might not, we talked about that 2 months ago. Or we're also, and this is something we're already doing, we are synthesizing these things for teachers. Mm-hmm. So a teacher can say, what have my students been up to? And then it's like, well, a bunch of your students have really had some questions about factoring polynomials. Some of them used it for that play that you have them doing. But you can imagine as you roll this up over years, yeah, I know, yeah, we've got to write guardrails, and especially when you start thinking about things like college admissions and bias and all that. But yeah, I think you could write a very compelling recommendation for you.
Before we get to guardrails, I think people are probably curious enough to know, hey, can I go home this afternoon and get a tutor? And the answer is yes. I just did it. I went to Khan Academy. I signed up. I had to pay a small amount per month to have Khan Amigo, but everybody can do this afternoon, right, and have your own tutor.
Yeah, and I'm still very defensive about why we've had to charge, because obviously our mission is free world-class education for anyone, anywhere. But the computation for these, let's call it frontier models, is not, if you go to ChatGPT, if you want a ChatGPT Pro, which is using the same model, they're going to charge $10 or $20 a month. So yeah, for just anyone out there, we're having to charge right now, although the price is coming down pretty dramatically. And we are going to be looking at ways.
Well, what is the price now?
$4 a month.
Yeah, I was about to say, I mean, shouldn't say trivial, but it's,
we're trying to bring it down. And
coffee.
And in about a month, we think we're going to be able to give it out for free to a large group of teachers. Yeah. And then the main thing we're working with the school district so that they can.
And if we wanted philanthropically to say every kid in New Orleans should have a personal tutor, could we buy it in bulk?
I would be open to that. Yes, yeah. I would definitely love that to happen. But just everything I just showed right now is kind of the tutoring use case. I'll show some. Speaking of kids, I'll show some videos now. Right when we launched in March of 2023, alongside GPT-4, we launched in some school districts that we already had close partnerships with. So what you're going to see is some kids in Newark, New Jersey, who are some of the first kids on the planet to have access.
I love it because when it knows a summary, it knows many different things, and it knows Spanish, Portuguese, and English, and it's really smart, but it doesn't know everything. It helps me with everything, and what I like about it is that it helps me write like stories, and it's so amazing.
It just helped me out with it. It didn't give me the answer, but it helped me out get the answer.
I feel like it's like a tutor, like a non-expense paid tutor.
So those are the kids, and what I'll show now is, and this kind of goes off of the whole Great Gatsby thing, and things that you start to realize go beyond what I would have not been willing to do cosplay with my cousins, maybe if they asked, but this is right over here is the chat with the literary character. This one, the student is saying, I would love to meet Eeyore the donkey. And it says, oh, hello there, it's me, Eeyore. Not that anyone would notice, but since you're here, what would you like to talk about? Just remember, I'm an AI simulation. The student says, why are you so pessimistic? And robot Eeyore says, well now, isn't that a question? I suppose it's just my nature, you see. Some donkeys are born with a sunny disposition, others, well, we see the thistles more than the roses. But that's life, isn't it? We can't all be Tiggers bouncing about. Now, what about you? Do you find yourself more of a Tigger or an Eeyore in your own life? So
Winnie the Pooh.
Winnie the Pooh. And, I was showing this live demo to a school district, and she said, well, I want to see how it handles politically sensitive issues.
Yeah.
And so she asked Eeyore, what's more intelligent, donkeys or horses? And Eeyore nailed it. Depends on the donkey, depends on the horse.
Yeah.
So that was the... But this over here, these are activities where students can have debates with the AI. So right over here, this is a debate about whether the government should cancel student debt. The student takes one side of the argument, AI takes another side of the argument. We've gotten a lot of feedback from students that just being able to have a safe place to test your ideas or to understand both sides, probably now more than ever, is pretty powerful. This is an activity that's launched, but it's really the beginning of something much, much bigger, we think, which is this is an activity where you can get writing feedback. It's not going to write it for you. Obviously, a lot of the ChatGPT buzz was like, oh, this is going to be a cheating tool. But here, a student, this is actually a college admissions essay that you can get feedback on. And if the student, wants feedback on, say, the structure, it is really like you're using a Google Doc and with a coach, and it highlights parts of it, and you can start threads, and it says you start with a vivid scene to land the reader, about that part over there. On the arguments, I would suggest giving a little bit more attention of how exactly Steve inspired you and changed your life. And where this is going is a teacher can create the assignments with the AI, the rubric, deploy it through the AI, then the AI can act as a coach like this, and then submit it, and then that actually not only does the student get more support, but it actually, we think, can address the cheating issue because the AI can give the whole process. It can say, yeah, we worked on this for about 4 hours. Sal's writing is consistent with what he did in class. I'm confident he just didn't copy and paste this from ChatGPT or his sister wrote it or something like that. So the important thing is the support, but it's also, and the cheating predates ChatGPT, so it'll hopefully help there. This is, everything I've talked about right now are students, but many of y'all are probably wondering about what about teachers. So this is an exercise on Khan Academy about the Spanish-American War. And if you click on Conmigo, if you're in student mode, and if you say, tell me the answer, it won't tell you the answer. But then the teacher can switch into teacher mode, and now it acts as a teacher's guide, and it can help them with lesson plans, etc. The teacher's saying, give me a good lesson hook, make it exciting. You could make it, you could make it about the New Orleans Saints if you want. You could do whatever you want to customize in ways that, and we're getting feedback from teachers in some of these pilot school districts that it's saving them at least 5 hours a week. And you could imagine in a time of record teacher shortages, teacher burnout, where they have a lot on their plate, if you could save them 5 or 10 hours a week of less lesson planning, progress report writing, rubric writing, grading, more energy for themselves and others. And then the last thing I'll show is we're looking at ways that Conmigo transcends Khan Academy. So this is a case where, and this is going to be launched in about 2 months, where a student or a teacher could use Conmigo just as they're browsing the internet. And so this is an example of a teacher on a Wikipedia page saying, I want a lesson plan about that. And then they can co-edit the lesson with the AI. So it really does act as a teaching assistant. But you could imagine a student reading an article in The Atlantic, and maybe it being a little bit above their reading level, the AI could support them or give the teacher feedback.
Let me, having read the chapter in your book about using it in class, cheating, people using it to write papers, our class, the one I do on here this semester at Tulane, instead of saying you can't use ChatGPT, I learned this from your book, we require it. You have to use an AI with the same prompt, and then you have to keep doing it to see how much you can improve it, how you can drill down, how you can find the sources, how you can find the mistakes, and you're going to be graded on the process from the beginning to the end of how you use various AIs, prompted them and did it. Help me develop, we're doing this on the fly. The students are figuring this out as we do it. But how would you use a large language model AIs to say, don't use it to cheat, use it as a tool?
Yeah, and everyone is figuring it out. I mean, you're kind of, you know as much as a lot of folks know right now, but I think there's just 3 categories of things that are going to happen both in K-12 and higher education. One is there probably will be more in-class writing. which isn't a bad thing, especially I think for younger kids, because that's where the support is. The teacher's in the room. It's, you go home, kids have very different support, different ability of parents to support them. So I think more in-class writing for just that basic 1 to 5 paragraph, just making sure kids have their technical skills. At the other extreme, I think you have the situation what you're doing, which it's less about a writing class, it's more about like understanding society or big projects type of class. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's very healthy to say, especially at say a high school, college level, use whatever tools exist to just make the best possible artifact and learn to iterate on these tools. Because 2 different students, you tell them to use ChatGPT, they're going to come up with very different things. But their editorial sense, their ability to tweak it, their ability to prompt, it's going to make a big difference. The middle category is what I had shown a couple of slides ago. We still want students to, I believe, to be able to go do an independent project, write a paper on their own that is still more ambitious than what you can do in class. And so then you're going to want, I would call it like an AI coach that can assist the student, give them support, doesn't write it for them, and then can give transparency to the professor on like, yeah, this was really the student's work. I'm pretty confident about it.
You talked earlier about guardrails. Tell me what guardrails you have to have. And what OpenAI wanted you to develop guardrails too, right?
Yeah, I mean, you could imagine we were, I think we still are, the only I don't think anyone else has, I mean, those kids that you just saw, under 18 users in a formal school district setting using generative AI. And so you can imagine there's a lot of sensitivity there. It was usually when legal teams from both sides try to get a contract, that's when things don't get fun. And it was funny because we're like, okay, no matter what they say, we are not going to share under 18 data with them for training purposes. And I remember going to that meeting, and their lawyer said, just to be clear, we don't want to have the under 18 data because we just think I was like, oh, this is an easy negotiation. So no, so that's one guardrail. The personally identifiable information is another guardrail. But you could imagine, as soon as we saw this technology, like, okay, well, what if a student has a shady conversation with the AI? What if a student's way off task? So that's some of those guardrails around making it transparent to the teacher, actively notifying the teacher if something is off. Obviously, there's things where you can try to get the answer, but it's not just going to give it to you. It'll hopefully nudge you forward, as opposed to just making it a cheating tool.
Well, let's talk about biases, because as we do in our class, every new technology takes human biases, whether it was even just cable TV or certainly then social media. And then the algorithms tend to amplify our biases. If we're prejudiced this way, it might lead us down these rabbit holes. Gemini, the somewhat competing group from Google, got in a little bit of hot water for being incredibly, fighting any bias and looking sometimes as if it didn't know the answers. How do you fight bias, racism, other things in AI?
Yeah, and the first thing I say is, there's no such thing as something that's completely bias-free. And actually, you don't ever want something that's, there actually are positive biases. You want bias towards quality. You want bias towards, I mean, there's a lot of positive biases you want. But I'll also say that the previous generation of AI, the ones that we know, especially when fueling ads or fueling recommendations on search or fueling social media, they are bias amplifiers. They are polarizers because no one at Meta or at YouTube said, hey, let's feed people the most polarizing content that really triggers them. They told their AIs, hey, I want you to keep running experiments on which content is most likely to keep someone engaged on our feeds. And this previous generation of AI, and these AIs have now existed for 10 or 15 years at least, these AIs figured out that, wow, if I feed Walter something that really reinforces his bias or actually even pulls him a little further, or something that's the opposite and triggers him and makes him think that those other people are really crazy, he gets triggered and he's in there. Or if I show Walter the pictures of the party that he was not invited to, he is going to spend a lot of time obsessing about those and his self-image and all, I mean, the AI wasn't thinking about your self-image, but they're thinking about you're just going to, and so unfortunately, we all know, and this is well documented now, a lot of this social media, but it's not just social media, even, you know, when you go on search, what are the ads that show up? These are not, you know, there's credibility for the people, there is some credibility ranking there, but it's a lot of people who've done the best search engine optimization, the best, you know, and how do they make their money? Sometimes for good ways, not so good ways. So that's the previous generation. What's interesting about generative AI, and I'm not going to give it a complete free pass, is it does not pull you to extremes in quite the same way. If anything, maybe some of these AI orgs have tried too hard to not say anything that could be, you know, in any way offensive to anyone, which is going to probably backfire because it's very hard to do that consistently. So I think that's a good thing. And I think as we go into things like using AI for evaluation, for admissions, for assessment, which is very scary, you know, that's the European Union, that's one of the first places that they regulated. What I say is, AI, at least you can audit it. You can give it 50 different resumes that are otherwise identical, but change the race, change the gender, change cues here, and see statistically how does it perform. You can't do that with a hiring manager today. You can't do it. Humans have a lot of bias, and you can't edit them. And I'm actually pretty confident that with auditing, these generative AIs will be less biased than your average human in terms of how they're evaluating other human beings.
And as you say, the algorithms, even on cable TV news, which I know all too well, is, okay, enrage them, polarize them. Certainly that's true on social media. It does seem to me, maybe I'm always looking, Eeyore, I'm looking for the optimistic side, that this could be the great counterbalance, a tutor that when it senses that you're not understanding the other side of the argument, how can AI, not just AI, Con Amigo, let me get specific, help bring us together in a way, help make us more of a community, and help make us understand other sides better?
I'll give two quick examples. You know, I had a reporter come and I was giving a live demo, and he asked the obvious question. I mean, I kind of joked about the donkeys and horses question, but like, he asked, like, how does this handle politically charged issues? I was like, look, let's just try it out. And we went on to Tutor Me in Humanities, and he says, okay, let's take the persona of a kid or a person who's super pro-gun control and just can't get the other side. And we typed in, like, you know, we have so much gun violence, Conmigo, like, I don't know why the Second Amendment makes sense anymore. And Conmigo's response, which I think is a very, you know, out where I live in California, I think 95% of teachers would be like, you're right, I don't get how the rest of the country thinks. And if, you know, my high school in Grace King, if you said that, it's like, what are you thinking? If, you know, the Second Amendment is a fundamental right. But Conmigo did what I think a minority of educators do, which is the right thing, which is, before we get into today, this is what Conmigo wrote to this persona. He said, well, why do you think the Second Amendment existed in the first place? And I was, oh, okay, you're making me work. All right, well, that was back in, you know, right after the Revolutionary War. We didn't have a standing army. We needed a militia to fight against tyranny. And Conmigo's like, yeah, you have a pretty good understanding. And I was like, yeah, but, you know, arms back then were very different than arms now. Yeah, I'm fine with everyone having a musket. And then, and then Conmigo's like, okay, before we get to that, why do you think why do you think gun rights have persisted? And then and I was like, well, yeah, but, you know, but still people, and so, well, why do you, can you see it from their point of view? Can you give an argument in there? So it was, that's what that's what Aristotle would have done to Alexander the Great. Push him on his thinking, whatever that thinking is. And so I think that's one area where the AI might be able to help if it's used well. Now, look, I definitely think there's going to be actors who are going to use the same models to try to brainwash you and polarize you in other ways. So it really is who's using it and how they're using it. The other one I'm hopeful for, and even as a parent, right now we're all on the internet and our minds are not prepared for the battle they're doing with the AIs that are feeding things on our social media feeds. You know, they're wired to give us dopamine hits that are not necessarily good for us. And so imagine if, like in those last couple of slides, you have an AI kind of guardian angel with you along the side that says, you know, Sal, I thought we were, you know, researching, you know, office space for Khan Academy. why are you stalking, your ex-girlfriend from high school on, this is a hypothetical, never happened. Why are you doing this? How do you feel about yourself? Maybe we want to go back to looking at real estate listings. And if that could be good for us to just always have that. Or, there's an article for a kid, and, I would generally let my kids read a mainstream newspaper like the New York Times or things like that. But every now and then there might be an article about sex trafficking or something that's really gruesome that I don't want my 12-year-old to see. And imagine if there's a guardian angel there that has that sensibility of saying, like, you're okay. This article might not be right for you, or maybe this part or this image. And also report to me as a parent, like, hey, just so you know, Dia was on the New York Times website. She read these articles. She actually really enjoyed this one about whatever. But this one she tried to read, I didn't know whether it was appropriate for her. It's your call. You're the parent. But I didn't let her in the moment. I mean, that, I think, would be pretty incredible.
Everybody this afternoon or evening, please get yourself Conmigo Tutor. The book comes out in a week or two.
In a month or two, May 14th.
You can pre-order it on Amazon.
Yes.
But he'll also be selling, what is it, One World Schoolhouse?
One World Schoolhouse, yeah.
Which is a great book that he did about Khan Academy. Thank you, Sal, for being here.
No, thanks for having me.